Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I am here with the wonderful Shauna Hicks, and she is going to help us celebrate our VGA birthday by giving us a presentation called Downunder Ancestors, a Mixed Bunch. Shauna, thank you so much, and take it away.
Good. Thank you very much for having me, and happy birthday, everyone. And I hope you're enjoying this. I've been doing my own family history for 45 years. So I thought with this talk, I would try and give you a brief overview of what our ancestors are like down under. I've called it a mixed bunch because so many people have come to Australia over the years. We have our First Nations people, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We have our convict settlements. We have our free settlers. We have what I've called our fortune hunters, which are our miners, people who've come down here to seek gold and make a fortune and maybe go home again. And of course, we take war refugees, and we have done that since World War I. So first up, we're going to have a little look at First Nations. I have no First Nations heritage myself, so this is just a few facts. In 2017, they discovered this rock shelter up in the top end, which is the Northern Territory up near Darwin, and it pushes Australia's human history back to 65,000 years. So when the Aboriginal people first came here 65,000 years ago, it makes them one of the most isolated people because no one else came after them until we started to see European exploration. And so this was an exciting discovery because before that we had 40,000, 50,000, maybe 60,000. So each time they find one of these ancient dwelling places, it changes our history slightly. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been here for a very long time. Now, some seem to think that perhaps Aboriginal people are all the one people, even though their ancestors came here 65,000 years ago. They still developed into their own cultures and distinct areas and had their own customs and that sort of thing. And so this map, which was created in 1996 from IATSIS, which is the government department for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander studies, shows you just how diverse Australia and even Tasmania there at the very bottom of the screen, how diverse our population is. They had their own dialects as well. And so you have a lot of different features. It's not just one Aboriginal culture. Now, looking at population, this is the 2016 census, and you can see a count of the various states and territories that make up Australia. And we had about not quite 650,000 Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in 2016. Our total population was about 23.5 million. So we don't have a large Indigenous population, but what we do have is their fantastic culture and heritage. One of the sadder parts of Australian history is our interactions with the First Nation people in our colonial times. And this was a map that's been created by the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, and it shows colonial massacres across the continent. And of course, it's a lot more dense around the coastal areas because that's where the Europeans were settling and coming into conflict with the First Nation people. So there's a lot of sadness behind that map. Now, IATSIS, as I said, is the government department that helps First Nation peoples trace their identities and family histories. So this is a PDF family history kit that they've put online for Indigenous people, but it can also be used by non-Indigenous people because it has the same basic search methodology for family history, the same resources, those sorts of things. And so it's quite useful, and it is free online. Now, the sort of next big wave of people to Australia were our convicts. And of course, that started in 1788. And I'm not going to try and condense all of the convicts' history into this sort of birthday celebration. So what I'm going to do is just look at one aspect, which was the sad end to the first settlement on Norfolk Island. The colony was based around Sydney Cove, and they had trouble trying to feed people and all that kind of getting settled issues. And so Norfolk Island was settled by a small band of convicts and Marines to help provide food for the main colony back on the mainland. And our convict ancestors were part of this first settlement at Norfolk Island. Now, they helped to do farming here. They, when they finished their terms, the sentences, they were allowed to settle, and they were given land and allowed to farm. They married, they had children. They built up this wonderful colony on Norfolk Island. Now, our ancestors' land was just sort of to the left of where this photograph was taken, which is Kingston today. But you can see they were up on the hill. It's beautiful. You've got ocean views, totally peaceful kind of place to live. And they didn't want to leave when the convict authorities said they were going to close it down and move everyone back. So in 2007, we went across to Norfolk Island for the 100th anniversary of the closing of the first settlement. Now, when we booked the trip and all that, we didn't quite realise we were going to be part of the reenactment. And so we provided the entertainment for all the tourists and that sort of thing. But it was interesting because from a family history perspective, we don't often walk in our ancestors' steps. It gives you a totally different idea of what life was like. So we were rounded up, we were forced to put these uniforms on, and we were forced to go to the beach, and we were forced to take our box of goods, and that was all they were allowed to take, one box of goods. So they'd been living there for years, they had a few kids, and all they could do was take one box and leave everything else behind. So you can imagine how sad, and this was done at gunpoint originally, but not in 2007, but back in 1807 and that, we had to force some of the settlers at gunpoint to get onto the boats because they just didn't want to leave this island paradise. That's my partner in the middle there, on the right of the box. Now here he is in the whaleboat. Now that was totally authentic, this experience, because they loaded people up with their boxes and put them into the whaleboats and then rowed them out past the breakers to where the ship was waiting to take them back to Australia. And I have to say that I was standing on the beach with a few tears running down my face when I realised just how enormous this would have been for them, because they had left England and been forced to come out to New South Wales. Then they were forced to go to Norfolk Island and establish that. And now they were being forced again to leave and go someplace else and start again. And so I was quite emotional. Max said that he was quite emotional. And when they sailed around the point and out of sight, it was, not a dry eye on the beach. Now, of course, you have to have your obligatory photo with the commandant on the island these days. It does reenactments or, convict banquets and tours and all that sort of thing with the ruins from the second settlement at Norfolk. So that's us in 2007. Now, I'm going to talk about free settlers. This was the next big wave. There had been some prior to 1842, but most started to come after the convict transportation system stopped to New South Wales in 1842. I'll just mention briefly that the convict system started up in Western Australia in 1850 and went through to 1868. Primary reason for that was they were having trouble getting people to work. They had no settlers going to Western Australia because it was more remote than New South Wales. So again, I'm going to use examples from my own family just to show you what some of their lives were like. And I really do recommend walking in ancestors' footsteps. Now, one of the big things about Australia is that we are a number of states and territories. Western Australia is everything on the left of the map here, and New South Wales was everything on the right, even including New Zealand out on the far right, and Tasmania is underneath. Now, this map from 1863 shows you some of the growth, and you do need to know when each of the colonies were established and when the boundaries changed and that sort of thing, because it impacts where you look for people. But this just shows you roughly. The Northern Territory is that dark one in the middle, South Australia is underneath, Queensland's the top right, New South Wales ended up being what it is, and you've got Victoria underneath that and Tasmania as well. So be aware that even though we say it's one country, we actually have all these different places to look because it's not essential record keeping. Now, this is my White family. Herbert White there on the left came out from Wiltshire in England. He married Dorcas Travascus, the lady in the middle. They had 9 children all up. Now, one of the characteristics of families in Australia is that they were big. Most people had around 10 children. And so it sort of gives you lots of leads to follow up if you're looking for DNA matches and that kind of thing. My grandmother is the lady on the far right, and she's holding my Uncle Gordon, her first child there. Now, coming back to Dorcas in the middle, she was born in South Australia, but her parents were Cornish and her father was a miner. And so they left the Moonta mines in South Australia and moved up to Queensland, to Copperfield. Now, this is Copperfield in 1876 when they were there. Now, just seeing this gives you an idea that it was a fairly desolate place. There weren't a lot of people at Copperfield apart from the mine, and it would have been hot and remote. And it doesn't exist today. The nearest place is Claremont, and there's one mining chimney left that sort of shows you where it was, and the cemetery, of course. So that was where they were living in the 1870s. Now, in the 1880s and into the 1890s, Charters Towers, further north in Queensland, became a gold mining centre. It had huge gold mine finds, and so they went to the big smoke of Charters Towers. And this is the main street, Mossman Street, in 1890. So this was a big town, if you like. And again, I like looking at these sorts of places and thinking, oh, did they shop there? Did they have a carriage like that or a wagon? And it gives you an idea of the clothes they're wearing. You can imagine that street when it rained. And Charters Towers is fairly central to North Queensland, so you don't get that much rain up there, but it still would be a hot, dry and dusty place. Certainly not like Wiltshire in England. Now, another one of my families was into tin mining. And so they went to Stanthorpe, which is in southern Queensland. And it's one of the few places in Queensland that actually sees snow in the winter. Not every year, but when it does happen, everybody jumps in their car and heads to the border to look at snow because it is so rare here. But this is the school, and I know that my ancestors' children attended this school because they're in the admission register. So you can see these little kids, no idea which ones they are, but look at that bark roof. Think about how cold this would have been in winter, a place where it might snow. And these poor little kids are in that room. So again, it's giving me that atmosphere of what life was like for them. Now, the category I called fortune hunters, which is, of course, miners. And I've already talked about a couple of my mining families, but I'm just going to show you that mining wasn't easy in Australia or in any of the states or territories. This is Queensland, and they're panning for gold. A lot of the miners found gold, alluvial gold, in the creeks, streams, and rivers. And so they would pan for gold, they would sift the dirt, they would bag it up, they would make mountains of dirt that they'd sifted. And so the landscape slowly became transferred from bush, as you can see in the background, to sort of just hummocks of dirt and cleared of vegetation. It was almost like a different landscape once the miners had been through. This is a classic Richard Daintree photograph. And again, you can see a nice bark hut. You've got the miners and the clothes that they would have been wearing, the tools. And I love the little dog in the front there. And so this kind of life was not that suited for women and children. And yet from school records, you can find the women and the children following their husbands around the mining fields. And again, you have to think, wow, my ancestor was in there with 9 kids. Or sometimes you know that it wasn't a bark hut, it's a tent, and they're in there with 9 kids. You know, and you think about your own comfy house and you've only got 1 or 2 kids, and life was so different. And I think that's what using photographs allows us to show. Now, this is one of our ancestors, and this is my son's great-great-grandfather. And I have to say, my son looks exactly like that. Sad but true. He even grew a beard to prove how much he looked like John Barrow Atkinson. Fortunately, and fortunately for his wife, he did shave it off once we all agreed that, yes, his DNA was not far from that of John Barrow Atkinson. But he came out as a miner to New Zealand, and there was a lot of trans-Tasman movement between Australia and New Zealand with mining. And he didn't have much success in the west coast of New Zealand. And so he then came out to Queensland. And he was one of the first at the Downunder rush. And I've put a little arrow there because this was attracted heaps and heaps of people, but there was nothing at Downunder. There was no water, there was nothing, no huts, no streets, no shops, nothing. But all these miners flocked there for nothing. And so he called it a duffer, which is Australian for, you know, not very good. And that was April 1866. The town, by the time he got there, was bark huts, gin cases, calico, and mud. And he wouldn't have been too impressed with that. But he then went down to the 2 Mile in Gympie, And he was quite successful here. In fact, he was very successful, and he ended his life as a gentleman. And he became someone who was on hospital boards. He was a justice of the peace. He was a mining director of several mines, owned shares, and of course, he had his 10 children. This biography that I've got of him here is absolutely wonderful, because he must have wrote it, because it talks as if they know exactly what he was doing. And he was born in 1845 at Kelt House on the banks of Windermere Lake in Lancashire. And so he has come out and made a total success of his life. But not every miner could do that. Not everyone did, but he did. And here he is here, slightly younger, on the Governor of Queensland's visit to the #1 Phoenix mine in Gympie in 1888. So this shows that he was already getting into Gympie society. This photo is great because you can see the ladies' dresses, the men's hats. There's a wonderful collection of beards and mustaches. And John Barrow is obvious in all photos that I look for him by his high forehead and this incredible beard that he seems to have had all of his life. Now, my great-grandfather, Thomas Price, was a miner, and he died at the Wee McGregor mine in 1918. Now, this is the Wee McGregor mine today, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I mean nowhere, it's out near Mount Isa on the far west border of Queensland. And to get there, you need a 4-wheel drive, and you need excellent GPS maps and all the rest of it. But what the local community has done to recognise the heritage of this mining area is to put this plaque up in the cemetery where Thomas is buried, along with half a dozen other people. And so his memory is still there. And I had someone go out who lives up that way and take these photos for me, because there was no way that I could ever get myself out there. I just don't like being in remote desert country. And the sad thing is that even though this is so remote and isolated and unknown, they told me that they have to replace this sign every so often because vandals get out there and deface it, which is really sad and hard to believe that people can destroy history just because they can. So this is another example of why my great-grandmother and her 10 kids didn't go out to Hikeville with her husband, because there was nothing there. It was only the mine. And so they stayed in Charters Towers and then moved to Townsville while he was out there mining. Now we're going to have a look at the war refugees. This is a huge field, and most of the records are in the National Archives of Australia, although the state archives also have a lot of records in this regard. So World War I and World War II, we saw large numbers of refugees from everywhere. We also took a lot of Vietnamese refugees in the 70s, and we have them from Africa, Middle East, and elsewhere. This is a website that you might like to look at. It's called Destination Australia by the National Archives of Australia. And what the government did with these post-World War II immigrants was between 1946 and 1999, the government photographers took 22,000 images of people arriving and living in Australia. So if you have anyone who came in after 1946, there may be photographs of them in this Destination Australia website, and certainly documents about their arrival. As you can probably tell, I love photographs. They can tell you so much. Now, the school photo of 1955 brought back my own school years. I can remember those little tiny desks, and they used to lift up and you'd put your school book inside. These days, you put your tablet or your laptop, and I don't even know if they have little desks like that anymore. But that brought back so many memories of my own schooling. And that's at Bonegilla, which was the big immigration camp down south. And the meals area, of course, was very much like a hostel, but at least they had food and they were safe. I've just included a couple of documents. I don't have any post-war immigration myself, so I've picked people at random, and I went with the name Alexandra, just because it started with the letter A, to be honest. Now, this is Alexandra and her daughter Anna. They've come out in 1949. This document gives you that lovely photo of both of them, and it tells you that she's Ukrainian, her eyes are blue, her hair is blonde, and she's 158 centimeters. And she arrived in Italy in 1946 from Austria. A few weeks ago, I was part of the History for Ukraine 24-hour history genealogy event fundraising for the Ukraine. And so that's when I found some of these nice Ukrainian photographs. Here's another Alexandra. She's single and she came into Melbourne in Victoria in 1948. Again, Ukrainian, single, coming out and hoping for a much, much better life. And she's quite attractive there. You can see from the side-on view. And when I look at documents and that sort of thing, I do wonder what did happen with their lives. And of course, if you wanted to try and trace people, we do have electoral rolls, we have school admission registers, and various things that might help you to establish. And of course, as being someone who was single, she probably married, and you may be able to trace it that way as well. But there are lots of sad stories in the National Archives of people who were coming out of Europe after World War II. Now, I thought, given that I said our people are a mixed bunch, I thought I should have a little look at some of our mixed bunch of animals. Now, most people think all our animals are deadly and will kill you, and that is quite true. But we do have some cuddly ones. And in the top left there, you will see a koala, and she's got a little baby Joey up on top. They're totally harmless. They sleep most of the day, and they're probably the thing that most people come to Australia and must see a koala. To the right is a dingo. Now, the dingoes did come with the Aboriginal people, so they have been here a long time. And they have been known to attack people, children. So when you're in an area where there are known dingoes, you do have to be careful and don't get up too close. They're not a dog. They're not a dog. They are a wild animal. So that's our dingo. And to the right of that is our kangaroos, wallabies, and that kind of thing. You'll see that the front one standing up has a joey in its pouch. And so these are marsupials, which of course are unique to Australia. And people think these are quite friendly. You can hand feed them, you can pat them, but you have to also be aware that their attacking position is their back legs. And people don't think about that. They think only about the front legs there, which is quite short and don't do much. But when they're fighting or attacking, they will stand on their back legs and jump up in the air and push out with their legs, and that can knock you over, slice open something because they have fairly sharp toes. But generally speaking, the smaller wallabies and that are much better to pat rather than the big reds, which can be a little bit dicey. I've seen some big reds that are taller than me, so I certainly wouldn't go close. And I have to say, I live here on Bribie Island off the coast of Queensland, and we have kangaroos and wallabies on the island. And so when we drive at night, we have to be careful that they're not on the road or they're not going to run out in front of us. So they are very common around the place. We do have koalas in the Moreton Shire. We don't have dingoes, but we do have some koalas, but not on the island, and some wallabies. So you can see them quite easily here. The little character to the far right is a quokka. And again, he's a marsupial, or I should say she's a marsupial, because she's got a baby in her pouch there. Quokkas are only found on Rottnest Island now, off the coast of Western Australia. So they have left the mainland, and the only place you get them now is on Rottnest Island, or you can see them in zoos, but to see them in their native habitat, we've been to Rottnest, and they just sit around and smile at you, show you their teeth and smile, but quite timid. Now, if we go down to the bottom row, we've got our Queensland saltwater croc, or they're also in the Northern Territory. Now, these guys are deadly. They are big and huge, and you have to be careful swimming, fishing in the Northern Territory, and even in far North Queensland, and even in the ocean, because there's saltwater crocs. And so we had a tragedy not so long ago where people walking along the beach in the water, and one of them was taken by one of these things. So you have to be aware of what the dangers are if you come out here. But I do recommend, Australia is great because we have so much diversity. The next little guy is the Tasmanian devil. Now, he's only found in Tasmania now. He's not on the mainland anymore. Basically shy, but he has some teeth and a nasty temper. So you don't want to get up close and personal, and you certainly wouldn't pat him. But you can see them in some zoos. They're endangered, and so they're trying to build up the populations. Echidnas, the spiny anteater there, again, very timid. It lays eggs, which is one of those strange things. The platypus is the other one that lays eggs. And so they're quite different animals down here as well. They will roll up in a ball if you go near them, and so you can't touch them because you've got all these really sharp spines. And the last one I'll talk about is the stonefish there. We have them on the island. They're quite common around the coastline, and they can be deadly. They've got venomous spines if you stand on them. So again, you've got to, if you're going to be walking in the water, you either have shoes on. Fishermen tend to wear shoes in the water, or if you are going to be there, you have to watch where you're putting your feet. There's anti-venom type treatments for some of our deadly snakes and things like that. But I will just round up by saying that this is a mixed bunch of our animals, and mostly they're cute. They're fascinating to watch as long as you're on the other side of the fence. And I will leave you with these last thoughts. Our animals are cute and deadly. Our history is multifaceted. There is so much that I could have talked about in this session. We are multicultural. The first fleet was multicultural. There were American Negroes in the first fleet. So we have had a diverse culture since that convict beginning. But one thing that joins us all together is that we're all grateful that our ancestors came to the land down under. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here enjoying our wonderful sunshine, blue skies. And I'd like to thank you all for listening to me. And again, I wish the VGA a happy birthday and thank you.